What's up, guys? I hope you're enjoying the Be the Difference podcast. If you are, I got a huge favor to ask. Go on to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review for us. It helps us immensely with algorithms and growth because we grow completely by word of mouth, organically. That's why there are no ads. Also, feel free to share this content with somebody you think might get value out of it. Last, if you don't know, I also do coaching to help people become the best version of themselves, starting with physical fitness, going all the way through mindset, sales, and leadership. If you're interested in learning more, there's going to be a link in the description of the podcast. You can schedule a time. It's a free assessment. All I'm going to do is have a conversation with you and see if I can even help you. I look forward to speaking to all of you. Continue to enjoy the podcast, and remember to always be the difference. And this is the Be the Difference podcast. This podcast is all about making you a better person in your life and in your business with coaching on sales, leadership, mindset, marketing, everything under the sun when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And we bring on guest speakers. Today, I got the honor and pleasure of welcoming Miss Dixie Gillaspie. Dixie, how are you?
I'm doing great. So thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. This is going to be a great one. So for the audience to know and understand a little bit about Dixie, she's a writer and a fire starter whose mission is to help people reclaim their power as super creators. She's addicted to story, allergic to cant, and has learned to embrace her natural tendency to navigate life with one foot in the world of spirit and the other planted on terra firma. For over 30 years, she has been coaching entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders to use the principles of conscious creation to overcome any adversities or barriers and create what they once believed was impossible. Her first book, Just Blow It Up, Firepower for Living an Unlimited Life, is an instruction manual for creators who are ready to blast through barriers and create anything they choose. And her most recent book, The Truth About Winter, is an allegorical telling of her own story, revealing truths that heal our trauma and empower and free us to live as the creators we were born to be. Dixie has been a TEDx presenter and has been honored as a Woman of the Decade in Enterprise and Innovation by the Women Economic Forum. Dixie, wow. I have a feeling we're going to get into some metaphysical here, into some law of attraction and manifestation. I'm feeling it.
We definitely could get metaphysical. The way I look at manifestation isn't what most people probably expect.
Yeah.
So we might get a little we might get a little confronting for some people that are really in the everything's law of attraction
Yeah.
space, but hang with us.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Let's get a little dirty on it. You know what I'm saying? Let's talk about it, let's throw it out there and see what everyone thinks.
Yeah.
So tell us where you started. How did this? So you've been doing this for, you said it's at 30 years that you've been doing the coaching and all this. How did that even start?
Accidentally, well, if you believe in accidents, which I don't really, but it feels like an accident at the time,
Mhm.
right? So I really thought I was going to be a drama coach. I'd never heard of coaching the way we think of coaching now, but when I started, my educational career, I was going to be a drama coach. And then my father, who had had prostate cancer when I was in high school, had his cancer come back as bone cancer. And so I went home, nursed him through the last stages of cancer and through his end of life journey. Started to go back to school, and drama just felt really frivolous, I think is the word I want there. It just felt really frivolous. And so I was kind of at that point, like a lot of us get to that point where nothing seems to have meaning. We're not sure what we want to do with our lives. Where's my purpose? Where's my passion? Right. And I fell into a job managing an accounting office and decided, hey, I could do this business thing. Like business really fires me up. This is a fun puzzle to solve, and it's all about people. And so I decided to go back and pursue business. And in the meantime, I got referred to a dental practice as hey, this is a dynamite manager. I knew nothing about dentistry. The next thing I know, I've doubled that dental practice and I'm really loving this, management and marketing and all the juicy stuff about entrepreneurship. And I'm taking classes and I'm diving in deep and loved it. And then that dentist said, I think I'm on the outbound path. I don't want to grow this practice anymore. I want to sell it to somebody else. It's like, now what do I do? Right.
Yeah.
And so I again fell into an opportunity as a consultant, medical management consultant. We specialized in what we call transition, really mergers and acquisitions, but you don't call it that in medicine. And
Mhm.
so I started as self-employed technically, but 1099 exclusively to a national consulting firm. Left there, started my own consulting firm, and then had one of those moments where I realized I've always been a really fired up person. Like, I'm not kidding about the fire starter. You need to borrow some fire, I got it. And I didn't have it. It was just, that inner flame was just like struggling and just really had to stop and say, why am I not fueling my passion? And
Mm.
I was suddenly back in that, what am I passionate about? What's my purpose? Right. So another big transformation. And I realized it was all about the people. It's I love business, but consulting, having the answers, having the strategy, working on the business wasn't what fired me up. It was the personal transformations that had to take place before the business could grow.
Mm.
And so I was explaining that to someone and they said, "Oh, you're a coach." And I literally looked at them, and this would have been in 2000, 2001. I looked at them and said, "But I don't really love sports. How can I be a coach?" I had no idea that was gonna be, like, the most common business title probably in the world today is a coach, right? No idea that's where the world was going, but they were right. That was really what it was about, and I started bringing my own personal journey of, living through trauma, coming out the other side of trauma, really embracing the wisdom out of the pain and releasing the pain, started bringing that into my work, and it's been on that trajectory ever since.
Nice, nice. And so you get into coaching and talk a little bit about your because you have a I'm sure a very unique style with your as a
Yeah.
fire starter. So talk a little bit about like what you do, how you structure it and how you help businesses and what your specific niche is and how you've
Yeah.
been able to develop that.
The niche really is leaders
Yeah.
because that's, we carry the fire. The visionaries, the leaders in the business, we're the ones that have to keep that flame lit. If
Mhm.
ours go out, we can't really expect everyone around us to stay fired up. So it's really that's where my focus has always been is the leaders, whether they're the owner of the company or whether they're that, what we call the entrepreneur. It's really interesting that so many people think entrepreneur has to be the business owner because that's how it's been used. But really, the origin of the word goes back to the French, literally meaning one who has an undertaking. The word entrepreneur does not mean business owner. It
Yeah.
means the one with an undertaking. So I work with people who are in a traditional employment role. But it's their undertaking, you know? So that's always been the people that I'm most drawn to, that I have the most heart for. And frankly, what I find is because they're visionaries, because they're innovators, most of them have a history of abuse. Most of them have a history of some kind of trauma because we get edited. We don't, those of us that are really the visionaries and the innovators, we don't fit into boxes. And when we're young, we haven't figured out how to pretend to fit in the box just to get along, right?
Yeah.
We're like bursting out of the box at all the seams. And there's going to be somebody that's forcibly going to try to put us back in that box, and we experience that as trauma. So the thing that I realized is that most of the people I was really drawn to working with because of their place in the business also had a history and also had navigated a lot of what I've navigated. So that kind of became part of the how we come out of our experience in the unconscious with trauma. And by unconscious, I don't just mean what most people think of as the subconscious, that level of consciousness. I literally mean we aren't conscious to what changes we've made, the adaptations that we've tried to make in order to fit into the world. we aren't conscious to our own experience and we aren't conscious to our own power. And that became really the focus. So the thing that's, I think, most, I don't know about unique. I never like to say that a method is unique because everything exists in, what we think of as the field,
Mhm.
whether we call it the quantum field, the 0 point field, whatever you call the field. It's been called a lot of things, but all information is there. So anything that I know and anything that I'm doing it has been drawn from others, whether I'm aware of it or not,
Mhm.
and it will be replicated by others, whether I'm aware of it or not. That feeling like we need to have intellectual ownership of everything that we think is part of what limits us. If we can only value the thoughts that we think we can own as intellectual property, that really limits how many of our thoughts hold value. So I
Yeah.
don't really think of it as my method is unique, but I am. So the work that I do is unique by virtue of my own uniqueness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The methods that I use, however, are drawn from a lot of people. I'm a magnetic mind certified coach, so I worked with Chris Duncan. He drew a lot of what he uses from Robert Fritz, who I've also studied with, also from William Whitecloud, from Colette Stryker. So we all have our leaders and our mentors, but
Mhm.
the way that I bring all that together is really about working with all three levels of consciousness. So that's to me is what makes this work completely different from where we started of, it's the law of attraction or it's personal development. The thing I love about your intro, and this is where it's just like, oh great, such a perfect fit, is when you talk about being the best version of yourself,
Mhm.
is that most of the work that I do is around identity and resistance. What keeps us from being our full self is our identity, our idea of ourself.
Yeah.
Our best version of ourself is just our truest version of ourself.
It's very reminiscent of Don Miguel Ruiz's concepts within the Four Agreements.
It is.
It's
That's
very reminiscent of it.
Yeah, that has informed a lot of my thinking. Joe Dispenza has had a lot of influence. I actually, one of the books that we didn't mention is the thought that changed my life forever. And I was first introduced to Joe Dispenza's work through that because we both had a chapter. And so a lot of his thinking has informed a lot of my thinking as well.
Joe Dispenza is awesome also. I
I
just listened
know.
to one of his most recent interviews with Ed Milet, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
He's so good. He's so good.
Yeah, and it's just so true.
Yeah.
That's the thing is that whether you experience it at the physics, just it's one thing I love about Robert Fritz. He sees thought and consciousness as having structure in the same way that we see our physical world
Mhm.
as having structure. And so you can understand it through that lens, and then it's not personal.
Yeah.
It's not my success is about me. It's just my success is the structure I'm in. Just like, the weight of something isn't, the value of it. It's just the physical weight it has in the world. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful lens. And when things are just true, it's so much easier just to say, oh, I'm just working with what is, just like I'm working with gravity.
Yeah.
It just is.
And a lot of this also is very it all ties into like a self-awareness, right?
Mhm.
Being aware of everything within yourself. And that's when I look at being the best version of yourself, it's a high level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And
We could
and
also maybe say that's just self truth.
yeah, yeah, you know, and that's how I've always how I've, in order through my trauma that I've been through, that I had to go through in order to come out the other side and realize my potential and my power was much greater than anything that I ever imagined. It was kind of living within my own self and facing all of that. And you can find out a lot with by learning from your own thoughts, especially through trauma, especially through emotional mental trauma, even physical trauma. And I think that's why there's people, even looking at, like, let's say David Goggins, right? He has a lot of emotional trauma, right? But he puts himself into physically difficult situations, which helps him to tap into different parts of his mind
Yeah.
because he just sits in that pain And that's how and he's learned how to do that and tap into a completely different section of his mind and have a different self-truth, self-awareness just through physical trauma,
Yeah.
that he's putting himself into, but he's enduring, right? And
Yeah,
I
but he's
and I do
choosing
believe.
it.
Huh?
He's choosing it.
Yeah, he's
The
choosing
the
it.
experience is
Exactly.
completely different when we understand that we are at choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of us that experienced trauma before we had physical autonomy, which is very different than personal power. We're born with personal power, but we're not born with physical and legal autonomy in the world. And we
Yeah.
confuse the two. We think if I don't have autonomy, then I don't have power. Because at the time that we're learning, we're 2, 3, 4 years old, and that happens to be true. And then we come into our autonomy and we don't claim our power.
Mm.
And I think, for those of us that navigate that, when we claim our power to be at choice, both in truth, in the non-material sense, our personal power, and in the material sense, autonomy. When we claim those two together and we say, I'm at choice. Everything I'm doing, I'm choosing. Even in the worst circumstances, I'm still choosing my experience. I'm
Yeah.
still choosing how I show up to it. All right. I'm always at choice. That's where we start to have transformation of our understanding of self.
Yeah. You can reach some great depths. And so I love where this conversation is going 100%. So, um, let's get into some metaphysical. I want to hear your perspective in this and how it's a little bit altered from what most people would see as manifestation.
I think most people that I see creating businesses, they're either in, what I think of as the hustle and grind,
Mhm.
or they're in the vibrate and wait. So many people that hear, manifestation, they think it's all about just getting the right vibration and then it will come, right?
Yeah.
And the truth of creation is never either or, because we're literally creating a something from a no thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not a thing, and through our choice and our action we make it a thing,
Mm.
right? So I don't really think of manifestation. I love there's a book called Presence that talks about I can't remember, there's 4 authors and I can't name them all right now because I didn't expect to be referencing that book necessarily, but I love it. But it really looks at that less as manifesting something as it is presencing it, bringing it into a physical presence in this dimension.
Mm.
It exists already. We presence it here, right? So the way that I work is there's a creative creation cycle, and it starts, of course, with a vision. Actually, it usually starts with a dream, that little glimmer, but we have to have a vision. The vision is big. People talk about, I'm going to create my vision. They tell me their vision, and their vision is an entire life plan. And then they want to do it this year because we're like that, right? And so the next step for me is always, what are you going to choose? What are you going to choose? That the vision is big, and it often if it doesn't have a lot of clarity because we have a wide angle lens on it. What are you going to choose? And then we work to get into what I think of as a true effective choice. So a
Mm.
lot of people are really living for a life they're never going to allow themselves to have because they keep investing in this, but they also keep putting off the completion, the culmination of that choice. They're never going to have the experience that they're trying to create. They're going
Mm.
to keep investing in it, but they don't have the clarity of what does it actually feel like? Like it's an experience, not just a thing.
Yeah.
Retirement is an experience, not an event, right? The new house is an experience, not just a structure. So we make those choices through making sure we're not moving away from something. We're not choosing it just to get away from something else.
Mm.
We're not choosing it just because other people think we should. I always tell people, do you want what you want or only what you want to want? Because we want to want sometimes what's easier. We want to want what's impressive, or we want to want, what is approved or whatever. So is it really heart desire? That's where we start. Once we have choice, then there's a cycle. The first place in the cycle is we have to bring that choice into clarity, and then we have to create singularity. So it's all about focus. And the focus is both it has to be clear and it has to have singularity, meaning there's not other stuff that's attached to that choice. There's not other things that are just as prominent in the picture. That's the one thing I'm focused on creating, right? I might have 5 or 6, but at the time I'm in action, I'm only focused on that one choice. And
Mm.
the next thing that most people skip when they're manifesting is they want to go straight to vibration, but they don't involve emotion. So the next step after focus is feeling. Can you feel it?
There's a book called
Feel it.
Feeling is the Secret.
Yes. Feeling it is when we engage that bridge between the unseen and the seen and experienced.
Yeah.
When I can start to emotionally experience the end result, I'm no longer living for a life I won't let myself have. I'm letting myself have it right now.
Yeah.
I can feel it right now. I'm letting myself live it right now. And if I can live it right now, I'm going to start to remove resistance to creating it,
Exactly. Yeah. It's
right?
in the book Feeling is the Secret. Neville Goddard, I believe, is the writer of it.
You're good at pulling. I never can remember authors' names. It's
Uh,
like my
I
downfall.
I've got a really good memory. I was in the military, and I was a human intelligence officer. I did interrogations, but also I ran informants or sources.
Yeah.
And when you're going through training, you have to run in sources. You have to literally have like an entire hour and a half long conversation, and I have to remember the entire conversation that I gotta say. I gotta remember exactly what they said. I gotta remember their mannerisms. I gotta remember like if they took coffee and it was
Mhm.
just like coffee, no cream, or coffee, 2 creams of sugar. I got to remember everything. I remember the people that came in, what the ambiance was like, everything. And then I got to go back and write an entire report on it. So I got really good, which I do believe after doing that, I know that you can train your memory. Like,
Oh, yeah.
because I trained my memory to just pick up different details. And
You would
so, yeah,
love the work of Robert Fritz because everything that we do in structural consulting, we don't take notes, we picture it. We're literally, just as you described, we're creating a movie
yes.
and all those
It, sounds,
details
it,
are
sounds a,
loading.
it sounds a lot like the Silva method.
It is. It has there's definitely some similarities there. And if you've studied the Silva method, you'd
I'm
recognize it.
currently studying the Silva method.
Ah, nice.
I'm currently
You
doing the Silva method through Mind Valley.
I was gonna say through Visions course.
Through
Yeah,
Visions course,
same.
yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's
Beautiful. So
great.
then you totally
Great.
understands that next step being that feeling.
Yeah.
But here's the thing most people leave out. They wanna get in the feeling of what we call the end result. They wanna get in the feeling of that choice when it's, at its culmination point.
Mhm,
But they don't get in the feeling of current reality. Manifestation says just vibrate with what you want
mhm,
and it will come. Well, that's only one piece of a structure. And again, got to credit Robert Fritz with this structure to create tension, which creates a tendency toward movement, right? Tension. Give you an example. I keep my props handy. Rubber band, right? Your muscles already know what this feels like. You don't have to
yes.
pick up a rubber band. Everybody's muscles are firing right now. Like, okay, I know exactly what that feels like. Tension creates a tendency to movement, right? It wants to do this,
Yes.
but it requires 2 points to create that tension.
Yeah.
True? So
So
if
it
I'm only
requires
focused on what I want as an end result, there's no tendency to movement because there's no tension. So feeling has to be the contrast between what I desire, what I choose, what I want to create, and the state of that creation right now. What does
mhm,
your current reality feel like when you step into that choice? Now I have tension, right?
and it brings the 2 together.
The tendency is to move, right?
Yeah.
What happens at that point, Greg, is we have resistance because there's another point of tension and it's the old identity.
Okay.
So current reality and old identity are in perfect alignment, but they're not in alignment with what I choose to create.
Yeah.
So it's always, I've got to take action toward the current reality. Otherwise, the psychological tension, the
Mhm,
tension to keep me here in this alignment wins. And that's where most people oscillate. They get in the feeling, they get all wrapped up, they take action, but they don't release the resistance. So they take action and it pulls them back. They take action and it pulls them back. And they're always in oscillation. And you'll have people, how is it going? It's going great. Oh my gosh, you can't believe what I'm creating because they're in this part of the oscillation. And
mhm,
you talk to them again in 6 months, and maybe they're in this part of the oscillation and they're down in the depths. but then they rev themselves back up and they get back in this part of the oscillation, but they never reach the end result because they're always being pulled back by the resistance of the old identity and the old structure. So the next step is always release resistance
Yeah.
and then follow through. And interesting enough, most people think follow through, action, massive action, right? Run out and do something. But action is both feminine and masculine. You
Mm.
know this. I love telling this to somebody that I know all everything's firing and just like I know this, I know this, I know this. I can see it. So when we take action, it's just follow through on that tendency toward movement,
Yeah.
right? So we set up the 2 points. We have a tendency toward movement. We follow through on that tendency. And sometimes following through is the feminine. Sometimes following through is creating space by saying no to some things so we can say yes to something else. Sometimes it's that feminine focus on the dream. Sometimes it's the birthing process, the gestation process. And then there's a masculine action, what most people think of as the hustle and grind, right?
Yep. Yep.
That's when that comes in. So we've done all of the vibration, but now we have to act. If we're not taking action in the material world, we're not bringing things into the material world.
Yeah.
Ask anyone who's ever had a baby. That's action. It's major action, right?
Yeah.
The next piece that most people forget is follow through. Or I mean is feedback. So we do the follow through, we take the action. Most people when they get to there's feedback, they call it failure or success. They don't call it wisdom.
Mhm.
Feedback is just wisdom. You know, it's a yes, move forward, or it's a no, course correct. That's not failure, right? That's not your stopping point. That's just information coming back to you. You get the feedback and you go back to the top of the cycle, or you go to completion. Sometimes feedback is you did it, you've got it, it's done, you bought the thing, you did the thing, you achieved the thing. Go celebrate, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's you're not there yet, but you have greater clarity. So when you get back into focus and start that cycle again, you have greater clarity than you did before. And that's exactly how creation works.
I like how you're bringing those two concepts together, because you're right. Most people they're one of two camps. They're the
Right.
like just grind, 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 right? I'm gonna outwork everybody in the room. Like, and then you have some of those people like that are like, hey, I do my meditations, manifestation, I'm on a certain vibration, I'm attracting it into my life, right? And it's almost like, hey, you got to kind of do both. You're going
You
to
do.
have some hustle grind. You're going to have to, these all the success. The universe has an infinitely abundant amount of opportunity and success. Period. Like it's already there. Like it's just, and you can attract it, but you also do have to do the work,
Right.
right? And
If
so,
we attract it and we don't express it through action, and it doesn't have to be hustle and grind action, it doesn't have to be hard, right? It can be, I always tell people the opposite of hard isn't easy, it's soft, right? But it doesn't have to be that hard action. It
yeah,
does have to be physical action because you're creating a physical result.
mm, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So if somebody's having a challenge with releasing their old self,
Mhm.
what would you recommend?
Oh
Any
dear.
tips
We
or
have this
strategies?
idea, don't we, Greg, that we have to release our old self or kill off the old identity. I got news for y'all. Your old identity isn't interested in dying. It's just not.
Yeah,
So, of course, if you've got this idea that I'm going to release my old self, I'm going to kill off my old identity, the old identity must die, you know, you're going to have resistance. It's going to fight back. Your old identity will always be in resistance to your new reality. It's a given, right?
mm,
So I don't think of it as I must release the old identity, get rid of the old identity. It's not about eliminating those limiting beliefs. It's I'm going to operate out of a new structure. So think of it as a kaleidoscope, okay? A kaleidoscope has all the components inside.
mhm,
All those components are true. Every time you turn it to a new arrangement, it's just a new arrangement of what was already in there. Nothing
yeah,
died. It just got rearranged
Yeah.
for a new expression, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly how I look at identity. So, identity, probably most important thing you can remember, it's not you. It is your creation, and you can intentionally create it.
Mhm.
Just like you can turn the kaleidoscope until it's an arrangement that you find most beautiful. And when you get tired of it, it's not working for you anymore, doesn't bring you joy, you can turn it again.
Yeah.
So, the way that I work with identity, I have kind of a working definition, not to be found in any dictionary. Don't quote it to Webster, they won't get it. But I look at it as my identity is simply my current understanding, experience, and expression of my true self.
Mhm.
So if we think about my true self is what's in the kaleidoscope, right? My identity is just the way I've created an understanding of that self, a way to experience myself, and then a way to express myself into the world.
Mhm.
Nothing dies. I change my understanding, everything follows.
Yeah. I love the use of the kaleidoscope as almost a visual tool to
Yeah,
understand how it's that you're not dying off. I see it as an acceptance, an extreme acceptance of that side, and like literally going deep within yourself and identifying all those weaknesses, mistakes, vulnerabilities, everything that has held you back, and staring it in the face, and then basically having a moment and realizing that that was those things happened because of, and very much uh, um, in the same vein of the four agreements, those things happen based on a set of decisions or laws or rules that we were imparted upon us that we may not have even be agreeing upon, but we have somehow accepted into our life in order to make those decisions. And when you can identify that, you can then choose, you have the power of choice to choose new laws or new agreements that you want to live by. And it's easier when you've identified, but it's very difficult to look at yourself in that way. And that's where like the self-truth, the self-awareness piece comes in, where it's challenging, is that people don't want to be, everyone's the hero of the story. Everyone's the hero of their own story. They never make mistake. Everyone else is wrong. I'm always right. And that's normal to feel that way, right? But when you have to really look at a situation and be like, and look at it from a an outside point of view, as if you were watching two random other people that were not connected to you, and you look at those actions and say, wow, that was wrong, right? Or I shouldn't have done that, or this is how I am in most, personal situation, business situation, professional situation, whatever. That's how I act, right? And you start to identify it, it's a lot easier to change those actions with the identification. It's a lot easier to identify and then shift. And that's like you shifting in the kaleidoscope, because you now know how you act in certain situations, because it's based on those false beliefs, that you can now choose a new belief. And so my for me, it's like extreme accountability. Like, what did I do wrong in any situation, right? Doesn't matter what other people did. I can't control other people's actions, but what did I do that I can control? Right. And that's how I've been able, and it's like you're not killing it off. And here's the thing, is that that side of me is still within me. And if
absolutely.
and if I don't and if I'm not careful, if I'm not observant in the way that I move forward on a daily basis, I can fall back into that
Yeah.
because I've already done it before.
'Cause there's a
Right?
lot of psychological tension for you to go back to that. We've
Yes.
practiced that, I always tell people, if you look at those 2 points in creation, what you choose to create, and that's an identity as well, your identity being a creation, you can choose to create a different one, right? The old is like this hyper stabilized stake, like it's been driven so far into the ground that the thing started to put down roots because 'cause
Mhm.
we've practiced a long time, it's been reinforced, right? And
Yeah.
then we have this little twig that we went and planted over here. This has to be reinforced and has to be consciously chosen. It's
Yep.
not like I make a choice and the choice is made. I make a choice, I reaffirm that choice, I reinforce that choice, I align to that choice. And
Yep.
that's the work until it becomes stabilized. But the beautiful thing is, it will stabilize. We create it the same way we created the current one, through
Absolutely.
focus and through reinforcement, right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to me that when we look at that um, the extreme accountability, I don't think you actually said it, but here's what I hear underlying it is it's a combination of extreme self-love with extreme accountability.
Mhm.
And that's a beautiful combination to just accept I created everything that I am and everything that I have.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it consciously. There are certainly things that I've created and that I've chosen, even and people talk about my childhood and they're like, "Oh, you didn't choose that." I'm like, "Oh, but in a way I did." When there's trauma, when there's abuse, I still chose how I showed up to it.
Yep.
Even when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, I was still choosing how I showed up to it, right? I'm choosing what I do with it today. Everything is really about choice, but it's whether we're making a default choice or we're making a conscious choice. And so the mantra that we use in my work is that you notice and then you have the power to choose it or change it. I
Mhm.
can keep choosing it because that's the choice I once made. That's what I just noticed
Yeah.
is I noticed this is the choice that you've been making. And now that I've noticed it, it's in conscious space. Now I have the power to choose something different and I can choose to change it. So it's always notice, choose, change, create.
And you when you make that choice, and you talked about being by default. It's like there's a saying: it's living by default or living by design. And
Right.
so a lot of people are living by default because they're making those choices almost unconsciously,
Yeah.
because that's still like you're talking about the difference between the stake and the twig. It's so deep within their soul that it just they don't even think about it. They just react, and they don't stop and take a minute to breathe and say, how do I want to react to this? Right. You know,
Well, they're making the choices unconsciously and justifying them consciously.
exactly. And justify
Blaming them
exactly. That's a
consciously.
great way to put it. They're
We do that all the
justifying it.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You always tell people you're unconscious. People say, "Well, my problem is my unconscious," or "The problem is in my unconscious." I'm like, "Oh, honey, your unconscious isn't the problem. It's just the program.
Yeah.
It's just running the program that it's been given so far." And it's kind of like a 3D printer.
Yeah.
You put a program in, and it will continually spit out the same
Man,
shapes
that's
into
deep.
the material world. You
Your
got to change
unconscious
the
is your
program.
3D printer. That's deep. That's right, because it
I'm getting
literally
metaphysical. Well,
produces
that's
the
my idea
world.
of getting metaphysical.
It produces the world around you, but if you're consciously accepting that, because you have to, this is what happens, is that when you consciously are no longer accepting of it, when you stop and say, "No, no more," like, "I'm in this place because I'm allowing this to happen on autopilot. I'm now taking the reins," right? Guess what happens is that your unconscious decisions will start to shift towards what you want. It's like changing that kaleidoscope. It's like, "No, we're gonna go this way." I'm no longer okay with the unconscious actions that or decisions that I'm just making. It's not okay anymore.
Right. And then there's one more ace up the sleeve,
Let's hear
and
it.
that is the third level of consciousness. So we've talked about, your self-conscious, your ego state, your awareness, whatever we
Yeah.
want to call it. We usually
I've
call it
heard
the
it's called the super
self-conscious.
conscious.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So there's the self-conscious, which really comes and starts coming online at about 4, give or
Mm,
take. 4 to 7 is when our identity of self, the ego state, if you will, comes online. The unconscious is there, before birth, but the superconscious is there from the beginning. So at the time of conception, when the seed is fertilized, so to speak, and it has the potential of life, we have a super conscious level of awareness and consciousness that is always connected to the infinite awareness, consciousness, what we call the field, right? And so when we work with the super conscious, it literally supersedes. It's super meaning above, not better than, not superior to in a moral sense, but it's superior to in terms of placement. So it's really able to change the program. And when we work at that level and we create from that level of awareness, then the unconscious program, the ego state and all of its needs and fears take a backseat really to the instruction that comes from the superconscious. So
mm,
that's how I work with resistance. before I learned that technique and learned to really access that ability to speak directly to the superconscious, I used to, people would come back and say, I'm in resistance again. I started something new. I've got resistance. And I could always get them out of resistance. But keeping them out of resistance was a whole different thing.
Yeah.
And really it's that super conscious awareness and drawing on the super conscious intelligence, what we might call intuition, higher wisdom, higher self,
Mhm.
call it a lot of things, that really speeds up that transformational creation process. So that's kind of the ace for me is we get to resistance. We don't have to fight it. Stephen Pressfield calls it the dragon, and I was just laughing. God, dragons are my best friend. I don't want to get up and battle one every day. That's exhausting. Um, but resistance is really a great sign. When we have resistance, it's because we're about to change something.
Yeah.
If you're just sitting on your hands, not changing anything, you will have no resistance. You don't need it.
Absolutely.
Resistance is there to keep you safe.
Absolutely. I found, so I had a moment in 2021 that it was a very just powerful, almost transcendent moment while I was in church one day. And I shared it with a buddy of mine who's big into like meditation and stuff like that. And he was like, dude, that was, you accessed your super conscious, bro.
Yeah.
He was like, yes, it was literally a life-changing moment. And what I found was, have you ever read The Surrender Experiment by Michael
No,
Singer?
no, I've heard
It's
of it. I've not read that one.
it's transformational. It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. It's like real life. It's like the movie Yes Man by Jim Carrey. With
Okay.
Jim Carrey. It's like a real life version of that, right? And basically, he starts to get in meditation. He gets into all this stuff just by happenstance, and he finds out that like he kind of realizes that like the universe and life like is like sending him out of stuff, and when he just surrenders to it, and when he just allows life to send him on the path that he was meant to go on, and even if he doesn't want to or not, there's a lot of points of time where he's like, I don't want to do this or whatever, but like he keeps seeing these signs and people will like talk to him about something. It's like the same exact thing. He's like, all right, I got to do this.
Mhm.
Like I really don't want to, but I guess I got to. And so he just started surrendering to life.
Mhm.
And it took him on this beautiful journey and all these different things. And so at that moment in time, but for me back in 2021, was I had actually watched the movie Yes Man, and I was just like, I was on this kick. I was like, I'm just gonna say yes to opportunity, and I'm gonna say all yes to all these different opportunities, and and I started saying yes to all these different things, which led me down a path, and it got me to this moment, this specific moment in time when I was sitting in church, that I had this very powerful and cathartic moment that completely changed my life. But that was where I really started to have that extreme ownership, extreme accountability, and extreme love of myself, because I started to keep the promises that I was making to myself when I wasn't before.
Yeah.
And that's what it was, is that I was starting to, I had that self-discipline, that self-love. And
Yeah.
so it was
When
just,
when you're living the I'm going to promise to be this person, I'm promised to do these things, you're not doing it. You're creating layers of dissonance.
yeah,
And just think about what dissonance does to vibration.
yeah,
It just distorts our energy pattern. So when we get into that, where everything's just clear as a bell on a single note kind of vibration, like there's the tuning fork of who we really are, like this is the true you, and everything starts to just um, be that same note, then it's so much easier to access higher wisdom, genius, whatever you want to call that super conscious self. But the other thing that's so important is that, like, when we do a super conscious recode, I can step in and connect with a person's permission or a group's permission. I do group work with their super conscious. We can instruct super conscious to remove the resistance. And if they go back to the same way that they used to be, the same actions they used to take, that either the doing nothing or doing something else, superconscious receives that message as more important than the message that I gave in a recode, and
mhm,
it just overwrites anything that we put in there. So I can totally give instruction, remove resistance to this end result, remove resistance to action, remove resistance due to emotions, beliefs, all the things.
mhm.
We clear the road, clear path ahead. Go flow with it, right? We create a structure of movement and momentum, and they go back to the old patterns. That's received as you lied to me. You didn't really mean it. Behavior is the highest form of communication and will always take precedent
Mm.
over any other communication that we give ourselves. So your point about I wasn't doing the things I promised myself I was going to do, you were just creating dissonance and resistance. And as soon as you let go of that dissonance and that resistance and started doing what you were telling your superconscious you wanted to create, clear path ahead.
Yeah.
Beautiful
So
thing.
it was a beautiful thing. It was it was. So I started reading the Surrender Experiment, and while reading it, I'm like, this is a very similar to the experience that I had, and I was like, man, I need to get into some meditation. Like I need to start doing meditation. The way he talks about and explains meditation, and like the way he built it up, and how he accesses it, and like it's phenomenal. Like he does just a perfect job of
I have
um
filed that away to read. I've heard it mentioned a couple times, and
yeah.
I just I've got a bookshelf stacked. I mean, I'm sure you do too. It's like
I
my
do.
Kindle's full, my bookshelves are overflowing.
Yeah.
So it's just somebody's gonna tell me what to move to the top of the stack. But here's the thing I do think about surrender. You know, when I hear people say, I just need to surrender, what they often mean is I need to give in to other forces. And I encourage you not to do that. Surrender works when you have an intention,
Mhm.
literally, your intention, right? You have an intention of where you're going. And that doesn't mean that you try to control the destination always.
Yes.
Intention can be I'm going to align to the purpose my soul chose coming into a body. You know, I'm in a body for a purpose.
Mhm.
And my experience is that my soul, when in perfect alignment with the divine and aware of its oneness with the divine, chose a purpose.
Mhm.
And as long as I'm aligned to that purpose, then I can surrender because then I'm just releasing all resistance to going here. But if I don't have here and I surrender, I'm like a beach ball. Everybody that punches me changes my direction. I
Yeah.
don't want to surrender to what is and all the forces of around me.
Mhm.
I want to surrender to what I'm choosing to be and not let anybody or anything hold me back from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You gotta you do have to understand the difference and like the connotation of how it's being used.
Yeah. Well, you
Because
can
people
feel the difference. You know, that's
yeah.
what I tell people is when you surrender energetically, you feel the difference between you've either released all the hooks and tethers that were holding you back from your true purpose and you've just surrendered all those attachments, or you've surrendered and you've just kind of collapsed into, not having any direction and not having any will. And everything that comes along, you're not listening to an inner voice that says yes. You're just saying yes to everything that comes along.
Yeah.
You can feel the difference in that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Dixie, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we could just sit here and chat for another hour.
I
Um,
think we probably could, but I think we probably shouldn't.
Probably shouldn't. If anyone wants to connect with you, Dixie, and they want to see, a little bit more about everything that you've been talking about, or look into your coaching, what's the best way to reach out to you, or just to follow you online?
The best way to reach out or to get any more of what we just created here would be to join my newsletter. So if they go to returntoyourpower.com, bottom of that page, they can grab an ebook, which is a fun way to dive into some of what we've talked about because it's called The 5 Reasons Your Inner Work Didn't Work the Way You Thought It Would. Grab that, you'll be on the mailing list and more of this stuff comes your way.
Yeah, nice. I love it. I love it. And the last question I ask every single one of my guests is: you have the opportunity to sit with, break bread with, learn from, have a conversation with three individuals, anyone in history, alive or deceased. Who would those three be and why?
Yeah. I have to say, you have to be careful about this one
Uh-huh.
mm, because there have been people that I would have named and then they showed up in my life. And in co-creation, you just never know who's going to come into your life.
Yeah.
The other thing that I remind people is all the information from everybody that has ever lived is in the field. And if you sit in superconscious, you can access that information. You don't get to break bread with them, but you can certainly access their intelligence.
Yeah.
So, one of those people would be Da Vinci, not for the reasons most people think necessarily, but because he used to write, of course, left-handed, so, his margins were a little different. He used to write "mihi diki" in his margins, which literally means "speak to me" or "tell me." And I really have felt over and over that he was demanding of higher consciousness more and more. He was a hungry, hungry person. He wanted more and more. And I really would love to have that conversation about what drove that hunger
Mm.
and where he reached out to receive that information. So he's high on my list for that reason. Um, you know, Someone else that I've always been curious to have a conversation with, and I'm just kind of because curious, because an interesting transformation is the author Anne Rice. She wrote the first book, Interview with a Vampire, after the loss of her daughter. And she wrote it to transform that loss. And I'm always curious why people tell the stories they tell to transform their own experience. And I would love to sit down with her, probably not over bread. It would probably be a glass of wine for her. Um, and just ask that question. What about that book transformed your experience of pain?
Yeah.
You know? So that's big. The third really is my father. My father was both my best teacher and my abuser. I got in the last maybe 2 years of his life to experience the man he wanted to be when he was in pain. I would love to sit down and have time with him as equals with the past behind us
Mm.
to really just enjoy each other as people.
Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful. And I can tell that even as the your past, putting that behind you, that you truly have released that, and that's powerful. That's something that's very difficult for a lot of people.
I've had a lot of people tell me it's not possible. I've had people tell me I literally had a PhD psychiatrist tell me, "One of these days, you're going to need closure and you won't be able to get it because he's dead. You should have confronted him before he died,"
Yeah.
which was an interesting concept. I've had people tell me, "You're making up your experiences. Nobody can have experienced what you experienced and be as clear and, have the energy that you have. Can't be. You're
Yeah.
lying to yourself." So I've had all these people that want to diagnose my state as not being possible, and I just smile and say, "It's possible for all of us."
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Dixie, for sharing that, and for taking the time to share some of your wisdom and your experiences here on the podcast. I know that there's a lot of value that the audience was able to learn and grow from, and I ask, I have one ask, and that's to share this with other people that can also learn and grow from it, that can get value, maybe change their perspective, and see life through a different lens. Takes a few moments just to share this content, maybe do a rate and review or subscribe, but it means the world to us, and it definitely has a lasting effect. This has been the Be the Difference podcast. I'm your host, Greg Birch. Until next time, we'll see you.